Hello, everyone. Dr. Eames here. This time, I'd just like to go over some of the pros and cons of free trade with you. There's a lot of information here on this slide, and I'm not necessarily going to read it all, but I do want to discuss it. Let's just look at the pro side of free trade first. Um, as I discussed before about world population, there are like 7.4 billion people on Earth, and those are potential customers. And so that is one of the big pros of free trade is the idea that if we can come up with the right goods and services, the number of customers out there dwarfs what we can obviously probably serve. Um, and the better that we do using a comparative advantage, in other words, we produce those things that we can produce most efficiently with the best quality and so forth, then we have a comparative advantage as per Adam Smith's theory. And it increases our productivity and it certainly increases our GDP over time, that total value of all our goods and services that we measure. Um, we can keep our own prices down at the same time. And that's why this commerce of free trade goes back and forth. It is a two-way street. That global competition brings us uh, imports that cost less than we can make some things here. So we don't have a comparative advantage with every item that's made, all goods and services. So if we're smart as a society overall, we import things we don't have that comparative advantage with. That keeps our inflation down. It keeps our overall economy sound and prices for everything down. And we can continue to have economic growth as long as we're pursuing some things, hopefully on the plus side, that give us that comparative advantage. And one thing that we really have going for us in free trade, obviously, is the ability to create a new way of thinking and doing. And that's innovation, new products, new features, new ways of doing something, new ways of becoming efficient, and certainly the creation of completely new technologies. Um, if you can do that, if you can be in the mix where you do rely on innovation and you're good at it, then you are going to have a strong competitive advantage in the marketplace. One thing that really makes all this work about free trade, though, is having access to capital when you need it. In other words, you're going to need to borrow money at some point, probably, and you need to have that access to money so that you can go beyond your domestic borders and make foreign investments in other markets and so forth. Um, and you want that uninterrupted flow of capital. If it does flow uninterrupted, where in general, if people can meet the basic requirements, companies, in other words, then interest rates stay low. And certainly the government's position on the plus side would be we want as few barriers to free trade as possible. And low interest rates, which the government can affect, really do put you in a positive sort of stance. On the downside, it's not all perfect about free trade. Um, because companies are going to do what's most efficient, you can lose your jobs if imports aren't kind of watched. You could get a variety of things happen where you're flooded with goods from another country, wipe out a home industry because they can't compete price wise out of nowhere. Um, or maybe they've just moved your factory jobs out of the country completely and outsourced them to places in the world where wages are lower. Um, that's a real downside of free trade because companies make decisions based on business. And so there is a bottom line there. Um, Sometimes that gives employers a lot of leverage, you might say, over employees. They can threaten their union that, hey, take this offer we're giving you on this latest contract, and if you don't, we'll just close the place down and we'll move somewhere else. So it does give employers a lot of leverage over manufacturing jobs in particular in our country. Um, but why do companies do that? They don't do it because they're not empathic and so forth, or they don't care about anybody. They do. But you go into business and assume risk and so forth to make a profit, to make money. Um, and so quite often it's because of competition that companies do this. And it means you just lose jobs. You lose professional jobs as well. You just lose them across the board. And there's always a ripple effect from one industry to another. Um, and if this happens, the downside of the free market, if the government is not paying attention and doesn't intervene when it really does need to, then as a domestic company, you lose your comparative advantage. Particularly if a foreign company can move in to your country and establish advanced operations, powerful factories, competitive retail locations, um, you could lose your comparative advantage to them, and because they will be acting very much like a domestic company. Okay, folks, that's all I really want to talk about this time. I'll talk to you again soon.